Hi, everyone. Welcome to GoLean6Sigma.com's webinar. Thanks for spending some quality time with us today. Hundreds of people have registered for this webinar, and we're really excited that you're all here. Lean and Six Sigma, as you know, are the go-to improvement methods used by leading organizations all over the world to delight customers, minimize costs, maximize profits, and develop better teams. Every month, we're crafting webinars just for you, our global learner community. And that our goal is to simplify concepts and tools of Lean and Six Sigma so that everyone can understand and apply them more easily and be more successful. Today's webinar is titled Introduction to DMAIC. I'm Tracy O'Rourke. I'm a managing partner at GoLean6Sigma.com, and today's presenter is also a managing partner. My colleague, the wonderfully talented, innovative, and consummately passionate about learning, Elizabeth Swan. How are you today, Elizabeth?
I'm good, Tracy. Hello.
Let me give you a little background on Elizabeth. She's the co-host of the Just in Time Café podcast. She's a longtime Lean Six Sigma consultant, master black belt, coach, and trainer for over 25 years. And aside from almost 3 decades in the business, Elizabeth also performed with Improv Boston. And since half of process improvement is improvisation, that's a great combo. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you again, Tracy. Good to be here.
So before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. At the end of the presentation, we will have a question and answer session. However, please feel free to ask questions at any time by entering them into the question area. We welcome you to participate, so we'll also be asking you to vote in some polls. And if we don't answer all of your questions during the webinar, we'll be sure to post the answers and share a recording of this webinar and the slides on our website at GoLean6Sigma.com. So please join us for our first activity, sharing where you are from. Hundreds of people have registered for this webinar all over the world, and we just love to share where everyone is located. So please click on Ask a Question and type in where you're joining us from today, and we'll give you a little time to respond. All right, so I am seeing California, New York, New Jersey, Reno, the biggest little city. Thank you, Laura. Cleveland, Ohio, Kathy Russ, thank you for joining us. Raleigh, North Carolina, Columbus, Irvine, California, Helena, Montana, Charlotte from Las Vegas, Troy from Tampa, Florida, Minnesota. Wow, we got a lot of people in the U.S. joining today. We've also have someone from Saudi Arabia. Thank you for joining us. And Toronto and Stony Brook, New York, and the UK and Japan. Cody Bridges, all the way from Japan.
Wow.
He's up. And Seal Beach, California. Patrick, I used to live there. That is super cool. All right, we got lots of people joining us from today, Elizabeth, to hear about Introduction to DMAIC.
That is great, Tracy. And I can't see you guys, but I'm psyched that you joined us. And Tracy, your introductions always make me feel better. So thanks for that. So as Tracy said earlier, we've both been with GoLean6Sigma.com since its inception. And our mission is to make it easy for you to build your problem-solving muscles. And that means we simplify complex concepts. We've made our training extremely practical and we think really enjoyable. We provide a running case study at the Bahama Bistro. Our restaurant team applies all the tools in all the trainings. And aside from this webinar series, we put out blogs, podcasts that Tracy mentioned, book reviews, lots of other information to help you get where you need to go. We've used and taught Lean Six Sigma for decades because it supplies the best toolkit for problem solving. And thankfully, there's a growing list of companies who agree with us. Here's some of the companies we've helped. As you can see, we've got brick and mortar, there's online companies, there are diverse industries like healthcare, financial services, manufacturing, and government. And why do these companies use Lean Six Sigma? Well, because it's about problem solving. And once you have an organization, you've got problems. And like all of you, these companies want to be the best at problem solving. So you guys are in good company. So more on some benefits later, but first let's go over today's agenda. What is DMAIC? So let's define what DMAIC consists of. Why do organizations use DMAIC? And how does it work? what are some common missteps when using DMAIC, and are there any tips and tricks? Let's dive right in and start with explaining what is DMAIC. So it's this 5-step iterative method for improving existing process problems that have unknown causes. The first step is define, where you define the problem. The second step is measure. You quantify how bad is the problem. The third step is analyze, where you identify and study the cause or causes of the problem. And then the next step is improve, where you implement and verify the solution, verify that it works. And then the last step is control, where you maintain the solution. So you've solved the problem, now you're going to maintain the gains. And it's in a circle for a reason. I mentioned as I described it, it's called an iterative process. And that means you're never done with process improvement. You can always do better. And you want that in a business, right? Things change, customers change, competitors change, technology changes. And continuous improvement is a mindset. It's a way of doing business. It's a way of operating. And it is incredibly powerful to operate a business this way. Now let's talk about what is this model and what is it not. It's the model you use to figure out the root cause of an issue. It is not the model you use just to implement known solutions to known problems. So you're looking for problems with unknown causes that need analysis, right? Need some study to figure out what's going on. The solution isn't clear, even though you probably have suspicions, you're not really sure. Stakes are high, right? This isn't how do we set up Pizza Fridays better, faster, right? It's a persistent problem. Some people think that they have to put up with problems, but this is the model you use to finally solve them. And maybe past solutions to solve this problem were ineffective. Maybe you tried fixing it and you haven't had luck. So that's what it is, and that's what it isn't for. So let's take a look at what are the different types of projects, right? There are a bunch of them. And of all of these, the DMAIC model is appropriate for the second one, that process improvement, that one in pink. But let's look at what the other process types are. Quick wins is the first one. There's a great. If you have quick wins, that's also a great thing to address. But they don't require root cause analysis. That's when you know the problem and the solution's obvious. Now, the trick with these is people sometimes think they have a quick win, but it actually requires some study. They don't really know what the solution is. These are often called just do it's or fast tracks, right? And then you've got process improvement. You can see at the bottom here, there's the DMAIC model. They're also called lean projects, or you can use PDCA, known as Plan, Do, Check, Act, or Plan, Do, Check, Adjust. We'll cover that model briefly. And then the next one is process design. It's important to have a model to follow when there is no process, but DMAIC is for existing processes. You're studying this as-is process, and in the design process, there isn't an as-is process, so you can't study it. So that's not going to work. Process design is also similar to process redesign, and that means there's an existing process, but it's so broken, you have to replace it. So that's closer to design than DMAIC. And DMAIC's for iterative improvement, right? You just want to improve the existing, not wipe it out and replace it. Lastly, there's infrastructure implementation. Also really important. Organizations that want to know how they're performing, they want to know what their customers are saying, where their problems are. You need that kind of measurement and data collection, but it's not an improvement project. There's no root cause analysis necessary. So DMAIC doesn't work for that either. And people come up with projects and they'll say, well, we need to implement this new software, so my boss wants that to be my project. Great, you should do that. But don't waste time using DMAIC because it won't help you. If anything, it'll just frustrate you. So those are all the projects. The one we're after is a process improvement project to work with DMAIC. So now that you know about all these project types, we want to find out which non-DMAIC projects have you been asked to use DMAIC on the most, because some of you have already been involved in process improvement. And for you, this webinar is a refresher. So for those of you in that position, I'm going to launch this poll and see if you guys, what the experience is of those of you out there who have had some experience trying to use DMAIC. So go ahead and Tracy, you can, what have you seen, Tracy?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and say that quick wins tends to be a big one. Is they're sort of forcing DMAIC into something like training. Well, we need to train people. So how do I make that a DMAIC project? So not only do they have a solution, it's typically a quick win.
Right.
Or, implement some sort of software, or even, well, there's a process that exists. We're not going to change it. We just want people to adhere to it. Well, that's not DMAIC either.
Right. Oh, I've seen that. Yeah. Just people, there is a good process. People aren't following it. It's like, well, you don't need a project for that either.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So those are the ones that I see the most, is people trying to apply DMAIC and not really going after the process analysis and root cause portion. It's really more just a quick win. And I think part of it is because we all are sort of trained to jump to solution. And DMAIC doesn't start with a solution.
That's true. People have bosses or have corporate cultures where people say, don't bring me a problem, bring me a solution. And that's not going to be a good way to jump into DMAIC either.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's take a look at what these guys came up with.
So 42% was the highest quick wins. So it sounds like people have also seen this happen. Process redesign, 34%, followed by process design, 18%, and infrastructure implementation at 6%.
Interesting. I didn't expect process redesign to come up as much, but it makes sense. People know that this process is truly broken. They're going to sort of rip it up and start again, which would be tougher to use DMAIC.
Yes. And I would also suspect that it's a software solution, right? We're going to redesign it and we're going to implement software.
Yeah. No, we've both seen that. Great. Thank you for that. Come back here. All right. So another important thing to look at is this other model, Plan, Do, Check, Act, because like DMAIC, it's based on the scientific method. And we're going to actually cover that in the next webinar. And it's just a similar process improvement model. All right. DMAIC expands on the plan stage of Plan, Do, Check, Act. So that's where define, measure, and analyze can pair up against plan. Improve is the do phase of PDCA, and then control is check, act, adjust. And it really focuses on this rapid improvement, rapidly refining and optimizing solutions in that phase. And it's a good comparison to have as you move forward. Back to DMAIC. So when starting out and preparing to use DMAIC on a process problem, here are some classic challenges and best practices. Finding good improvement projects can be difficult. You want to choose a project that's focused on your day-to-day activities. And a classic phrase we use with people is fix what bugs you. There's things that take you a long time. There's things you're constantly having to redo. Those are great candidates for DMAIC projects because if you've been doing them for a long time, that means you haven't figured out how to solve that. Maybe you don't even know why you have to do it. The other big deal is to ensure leadership support. We always say if you don't have a sponsor, then there's no project. You've got to have support for what you do. People have to be willing to support you in your efforts to change a process. Finding potential team members, also important. Enlist people familiar with the process. The greatest team members are process participants. And you want others to know about DMAIC, right? There's no reason for other people not to be educated about this process as well. There's free white belt training, there's free yellow belt training, and now there's this webinar, so everybody can get educated at some level. The first step is the define phase. Once you've got a problem to focus on, you're ready to dive into define. Getting this phase right is like getting the trajectory of a rocket ship right? If it's off, you might be heading to the wrong planet. But there's an opportunity to adjust throughout the effort. This is where we check and make sure that everybody's clear on what's happening. What are we deciding to do? What process are we working on? You're always striving for clarity. So let's look at an overview of the define phase. 4 basic steps here. 1, you're going to create the charter. Creating the charter means setting a goal, like we're going to reduce the time it takes to process an application from 4 days to less than 1. Right? That's a great focus for a project. Put that right in the charter. Or we're going to reduce the amount of rework with applications from 20% down to 5%. Again, really great goal statement goes right in the charter. And you have to be clear on the purpose. What's the impact? What if you succeed in this project? Will the customers be happier? Will they be safer, better able to do their jobs? Will you be better able to do your job? Next up is interpret the voice of the customer. This means that you're going to do interviews, surveys, whatever it takes to get clear on exactly what customers want. I remember a long time ago working with a hospitality organization, a hotel company, and they were doing a pilot project to understand how customers felt about, how guests felt about check-in time, like what was a good check-in time. So they were measuring how long it took when you were online, and they interviewed customers in the middle of this, and they asked them, you know, just to get some color or get them to explain what did they expect. Should it take 3 minutes? Should it take 5 minutes? Under 2 minutes? What was the expectation? And they said, actually, as long as everyone's working and trying to, you know, see to every customer, then we're okay. We don't like it when someone has their head down and they seem to be typing forever and they're not looking at anybody. And we don't like it when they go out that door, whatever that door is or wherever it goes to. That's really annoying. So there was these other voices of the customer they found out from asking these questions. So you really want to talk to the customers of the process to find out, do we really know what they want? Let's find out. Let's talk directly to them. Next is understand current state. That means conducting process walks, mapping the process. It's the best way to understand a process. There's lots of webinars and material about that. And then develop project communication means figuring out who might be impacted by the project and speaking with them regularly. And that sounds easy, but people get busy, they forget, and this makes life hard later on for the project. So we'll come back to that to see what happens if you don't regularly communicate with the folks that are impacted by process change. Why do we need a defined phase? Well, first off, you got to clarify the issue. When we coach people, we get people describing in their project charters things like, you know, my goal is to streamline the application process. And I ask them, well, what does that mean? What does streamline mean? Are you going to reduce how long it takes? Are you going to reduce the percent of rework? What's the focus? So it's critical to gain clarity about exactly what you're doing. If it stays fuzzy, then you won't succeed. Another big question is scope. And this is another place where I find teams might think they're addressing the application process, but somehow their manager thought they were fixing everything all the way to collecting payment. So clarity starts in define. You want to get that understanding and that clarity up front. And that brings us to the process improvement journey. So all of these phases are taking you on this journey, and the journeys are going to differ. And what you see here are samples of all the kinds of tools and concepts that help you along the way. A lot of these are images of templates or showing you what a process map might look like, or stakeholder analysis, or a model for how to work with teams. So these are all on the website. They're all free, and you've got lots of options. Let's consider some defined phase challenges and best practices. One, as I mentioned, you need a sponsor. You've got to get a commitment from them and the team members. You've got to draft your project charter with the team. That will help you build ownership. You can include them on the process walk, things like that. You also don't want to start with a solution. I know that sounds obvious, but I recently got a goal statement that said, by removing reviewers, we're going to reduce approval time. So people insert the improvement right in there. They pretty much come into a project knowing exactly what they want to do, which once again, I would say, well, then go do that. You don't need DMAIC. Work with stakeholders, involving the right people early is a totally key. Publicize the process map. This is a great way to engage people. We did some work up in Alberta Health Systems, and we called it a war room. It was a huge room. We put a big map on the wall, and we were trying to track exactly what happened from the moment a patient came in to admitting to the moment they were discharged. So it's a very big process, end-to-end process. We had lots of folks coming in to visit, doctors and nurses and PTs and OTs and lots of people, everybody involved, the people from the lab. And they would all come up and say, where did they experience problems? They would point to it right on the map. It was a really great method of understanding. It also led to clarity. We had the admitting nurses, we had emergency room nurses finally talking to admitting nurses because they weren't getting the right information. And once they met and talked about it right there in front of the map, they realized it was one phone call would solve the problem and end this endless cycle of rework of calling and checking the software to find patient information. So the mapping is a great method for discovery right there. And it's a great part of the journey. So the point with that last example also is that everyone knew they were working to ensure that patients got good care. That was the purpose of reducing the cycle time from admittance to discharge. So back to that purpose, people always need to understand, why are you doing this project? What's the point? Okay, so once the problem and process are clear, we get to the measure phase. So the measure phase, first, we got to figure out what are we gonna measure? If the project is to reduce application cycle time or something like that, then cycle time is the measure. And that's why step 2 is plan for data collection. Seems obvious, but sometimes I don't even see the main measure on a data collection plan. And what about separating that into different segments? What about measuring the time it takes to re-enter information? What about collecting data about the time it takes to call people to fill in the missing information? What about how long it takes the different people in the process to process the application, right? You can measure it by person. So lots to consider before taking that last step, which is collecting the baseline data. So why do we need this measure phase? Well, number one is to verify that there really is a problem. I've had a lot of teams who switch projects because, well, they heard there was a problem or their boss said there was a problem. Once they measured it, they discovered it was minor. And in the process of figuring that out, they find bigger problems to focus on. So getting data helps you build your understanding of the process. And aside from that, you need a baseline. You'll never know if you made a difference unless you know where you started. Again, that seems kind of intuitive, but people get excited about making changes. So I've had team leads that started changing their process before they even got their baseline, and then they had no way of knowing if they did any good. So those are some big reasons to have this measure phase, which brings us back to our journey, right? There are things you'll be completing as you go through the measure phase. There are templates like data collection plans, and all these things will help you get the work done. Lots of images of the data you collect, different formats you can put it in. Let's talk about some challenges. So defining the measures. Does time to check in at the hotel start when the person got in line? Does it start when they get at the desk? And when does it end? When they get the key? What if the key doesn't work? That happened to you, right? Then they come back down. Is that still part of check-in time? You haven't gotten to your room yet. So translating what you not want to know into something observable and unambiguous is the goal. And there's lots of times that people haven't been clear on that. Or maybe it's a tough term to clarify, like what's friendly mean, right? They have to measure that at hotels. How do they know if you've been friendly? Well, one of the ways they know is when you call down, they use your name, right? They can look at the caller ID and they can say, yes, Miss Swan, what can I do for you? But it's approximating friendliness, and they can measure if people use that technique or not. Also, finding data is not always easy. You might think there's some great data sitting in a system somewhere, but you look at it and not everyone entered the data the same way, or there's lots missing. Most of the time, you have to get it by hand, at least to start, and getting support and communication from others in order to capture data, that can also be tricky. People are busy, include them in the plan, let them design, data collection processes, let them work on those with you. People support things they've had a hand in creating. So let stakeholders know what and why you're measuring. Some work environments don't want problems exposed. The fear is it'll make people look bad, right? So that's an issue, or it could be an issue, depends on the culture. Also, make sure people know the purpose of what you're doing. What's the result of reducing rework or cycle time? Why should they care? And then, will customers be happier, safer? Always remember to clarify the purpose of what you're doing. So based on some of those challenges and best practices, I wanted to get a little input from those of you that have tried this so far, right? So understanding for some of you, this is a primer, but for some of you, this is a refresher. So what is your most common issue in the measure phase? A, there's no existing baseline data. You can't just go get the data. 2, there's data, but it's inaccurate. And then, sorry, that wasn't 2, that was B. C, our culture avoids problem data, don't want to see problems. And D, I need others to collect it and they're not interested. All right, so Tracy, I'm going to launch this. Let's come over here, come back to the next one, and launch that poll.
Okay, sounds good. And I'll just say that I think number C is very interesting. Our culture avoids problem data, and sometimes we know about it already, that it could be a challenge, and other times we find out after we've shared the data and the leader responded in a way that wasn't something we would want to promote, right? So we're like, oh, I get it. The organization isn't really game to share their problems with data. And sometimes we find that out too late. And that's why I always love doing these pilot DMAIC projects sometimes, because it helps us see culturally, how is this going to go in terms of, finding issues and exposing them and making them more visible. But I would have to say, though, A is the one I see the most. There's no existing baseline data. And a lot of it is related to what you said earlier with operational definitions. People struggle with something they've never measured before.
Yeah.
Friendly, or, even, we see a lot of cycle time measures, but it's usually the cycle time for a piece of the process. And what we really need is the entire lead time from the customer perspective. And most people don't have that readily available.
No, it generally leads to some form of manual data collection. And that's what people don't expect, that coming into these projects, but it's actually the reality is that you've got to collect data yourself, which makes you understand the process better. It's a good thing to go through.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's see what these guys came up with.
Okay, so it looks like same thing. 35% of the people said there's no existing baseline data, followed by B, there's data, but it's inaccurate, which is unfortunate. And 21% say I need others to collect it and they're not interested. Yeah, that's a cultural thing too. And last is C.
So that makes sense. The majority, there's no existing baseline data. That was helpful. Thank you guys for chiming in. Mm-hmm. Let's come back and move on to the analyze phase. So once you've mapped the process and collected data, it's time to study that map and study that data. So let's come into the 5 phases in the analyze process. So the first 2 steps are to analyze the process and the data. And that's where you guys become detectives. This is actually a great phase. This is kind of the heart of DMAIC. So you brainstorm root causes based on all your analysis. That means you need to include others. So once again, including other people helps you get the collective wisdom about what causes process issues. People have different perspectives based on their job, their interaction with customers. You want to get that collective wisdom. Then you develop root cause hypotheses. And that means all your analysis has helped you to develop educated theories about what's causing those issues. There's usually more than one root cause. So validate root cause hypotheses means that you are not going by instinct, right? You need data, you need observation, you need interviews, or some way to be sure you've understood the problem correctly. Otherwise, you might waste time in the improve phase developing the wrong solutions. So the goal is to unearth all the reasons for rework, delays, and all the barriers to flow. So why? Why an analyze phase? I love our little doctor guy here. So think about what happens when you go to a doctor's visit. You come in with symptoms, usually some kind of pain. And what's often the result of an exam or a conversation with your doctor? We often get pain meds, right? Pain medication. And we now have a national epidemic of over-medicating for pain. But is that addressing the symptom or the root cause? Because they're just addressing the symptom with pain. And that's what happens in processes. We address the symptoms. The example is like adding an inspection step to deal with defects, right? We think we're going to prevent them from reaching the customers, but we didn't solve the problem. And the inspection doesn't stop all the mistakes from reaching customers. So we need to understand and solve for the root cause. And that takes analysis. So let's look at this journey. Once again, lots of guidance, templates as you work your way through analyze. So let's think about some of those best practices and challenges that you hit as you go along here. So spending the time needed to explore root causes. You can't rush this. Good problem solving takes time. So give yourself that time. You'll see a piece of a broken map up there on the right, and then off to the left, you see some data. So those are the ways you're looking at your data, the ways you're looking at the map. And you can see a fishbone diagram. That's the classic tool for brainstorming root causes. One of the common mistakes people come up with are solutions that are really masquerading as problems. And the biggest one that Tracy and I see is a lack of training. The problem is generally people's knowledge level, right? They don't know the things they're supposed to know. And training is a way to do that, but it's not the only way. So that could be it might be just making an easier process. Why does it need so much training? And I think about a great example of that is McDonald's. Someone once referred to McDonald's to me as the largest organization in the world run by teenagers. And think about that for a second. It's amazing that more people don't suffer the ill effects of eating at McDonald's. But what they do count on is high turnover. They expect high turnover. They plan on it. They build their processes to handle it. So everything is visual. Their cash registers don't have numbers. It just has pictures. So you don't need to translate, well, let me look and see, well, how much is a Big Mac? Now let me type that or press that price in. You just hit the image of a Big Mac. So they have worked their process to be as simple and visual as possible. They didn't think training was a problem. They just thought the process, understanding the process, the knowledge level people needed to have was the issue, and they addressed it. So the biggest issue in this phase is jumping to solutions without confirming the root cause hypothesis. This is expensive, since there's a good chance the assumption of the gut instinct is wrong. And then it's wasted time and resources on a solution that may or may not address the true root cause. So spend time here to validate, use the data, use the observations, use the interviews, use the process maps, whatever it takes. This is the heart of what separates process improvement from just replacing old problems with new problems. All right, so that is the analyze phase. So let's move on to the improve phase. This is the fun part. I think you've gotten the impression by how many times I've talked about or warned about jumping to solution that this is where everybody wants to be, right? And it's back to that, don't bring me a problem, bring me a solution. We've probably just been trained over time to just be thinking about how to solve things. But now we've done our homework, right? We defined the problem, we measured the problem, we analyzed it. Now we're ready, right? Now we're ready to look at how to improve the process. So 4 steps here. So first off, crafting solutions means there's lots you can do, right? Involve, once again, the collective minds around you. Maybe you've been collecting great ideas all along. We always recommend people use a solution parking lot. You're going to have great ideas from the moment you have that project idea, and so does everybody else. So collect those, because now they're going to come into play. And some of them might be obsolete now, but some of them might be great, might have some really great ideas. So let's hear them, let's use them. Then you got to filter the solutions, because there's a lot of great ideas, but you can't do it all. And that might be just a case of we can't afford it all. We can't, maybe that's money, maybe that's time, resources. How much work does each of these take? And what's the return, right? How much is it going to impact my goal? How much is it going to reduce cycle time or reduce rework? Next step is conduct risk management. You've decided which solutions you're going to implement. Now you want to make sure that this change you're making or these changes aren't going to come up and impact the process in a bad way. It's like the ripple in the pond. And a great example was I had a team lead working with a delivery team. She was trying to reduce the time it took to deliver packages. They had a fleet of trucks. This was at a oil refinery. And one of the issues they had to solve when they got down to what was getting in the way of some of these guys being able to make deliveries was somebody was, or I'm not sure if it was one person or more than one person, were siphoning gas out of the trucks that were left in the yard. So their solution was to install locked gas caps. Now they installed those, but service slowed down even more and costs went up. So they had to dig into that and find out, well, what happened? Well, it turned out people lost the keys to their gas caps. They had to drive to have the locks removed and then reinstalled. So unintended consequences are one of the things you're looking out for. And there are tools to help you think ahead and come up with those mistake-proofing ideas. Another great example is some of you may, not without thinking about it, have this mistake-proofing around your house. Automatic garage doors, right? They're fast, they're convenient, they prevent your backstrain. I really was missing that during the latest power outage, but since there's a risk they might close on somebody, they came up with that electric eye, and that way they automatically stop. If there's a body or a bike or somebody's in the way, it'll pop back up. So you want mistake proofing in processes. Great if it's automatic, but it could just be manual. It doesn't have to be involving technology. And the last is determine your solution approach. Then it's time to pilot or do some rapid PDCA, plan, do, check, act cycles to try out your solution. Could be you solve the problem in phases. You got lots of options there. So those are the basic steps. And the reason you want an improve phase is, and this seems obvious, but did we actually solve for root cause? We have to check here, did we reach our target? This phase might require multiple rounds to get to the goal. DMAIC is structured such that we check in the improve phase if we've narrowed the gap between the baseline, where we were, and where we want to be, which is our goal. Or did we narrow that gap? And it might be a multi-phased effort, that's okay. So the analyze phase confirms the root cause, improve phase addresses it. And let's get back to our journey. So again, lots of helpful tools and templates at this stage. So let's look at some of the best practices and challenges of the improve phase. So dealing with increased resistance when people realize that their area is going to undergo change. Result of projects is change. Somebody's going to have to change what they do. Some jobs are going to change. Some steps are going to change. And people might not like it, and they might not even know what it's about. So you have to involve the right people. You got to invite stakeholders to brainstorm solutions. It's another opportunity for engagement. You always want that. And just think about your own work experience. Have you ever gotten into your job and been handed a new form or been told about a new rule? You don't know where it came from, whose idea it was, whose decision. You're just irritated because you had nothing to say about it. That's how people feel. I heard about a story from a large software networking company. This group was tracking down why they realized one of the root causes they came up with is some of their components didn't have serial numbers. So they couldn't charge customers for maintenance if they couldn't see that they were using their components. And it was about a $5 million problem. So obviously important. And when they told this other department, that they had to start putting serial numbers on components, the response they got from these guys was, I'd say it boils down to, you're not the boss of me, right? You can't tell us that we're going to change our job. Well, it got escalated. It didn't happen fast. It didn't happen nicely. Eventually they got it through. But if they had included this department in their process walks, if they had had communication earlier, they wouldn't have gotten so much pushback. Another example on the more successful side, this is a team from a childcare nonprofit. They were trying to reduce the cost of supply process. And this team lead, she got pushback on the changes she wanted to make. So one of the things she wanted to change was switch to a cheaper soap. And she got, people were worried about what is this new soap? Is this going to be an irritant? And she said, she tried it out on herself. She let people know she tried it, she used it, and she explained to everybody that it was used in NICUs, that's neonatal intensive care units of hospitals. And once she did all that, people appreciated it, and they said, great, bring it on. Let's save the money. So you have to do that essential reaching out. We've enforced that at every phase, but it's a big deal in the improve phase. So lots of great tools here, lots of great templates and techniques, which brings us to the control phase. So as fun as the improve phase was, the control phase is often viewed as housekeeping or flossing your teeth. You have to do it. It's not as fun, but it's actually setting the stage for more great improvements, and that is fun. Actually, improving stuff is a good time. I hear that all the time from people involved in these projects, how much fun they had just solving these stuff. So let's take a look at the 4 stages, the 4 steps in the control phase. First up is create the monitoring plan. Now you want to monitor the critical few measures. We're not trying to do detective work anymore. We just need some critical few measures to make sure we keep an eye on what we improve. We also want to come up with a trigger level, right? So if we got the delivery time from 4 days down to 1 day, then if it goes over a day, maybe that's the time to intervene. What's the trigger point at which we intervene to see, hey, what's going on here? And that's the response plan. You have to develop a response plan. So if you have to intervene, what do you do? So you want to think about that. Who do you call? And then document the project so that others can learn from what you did. It helps with training new people, helps build momentum for more improvement. And that brings us to the last step, which is pursue perfection. And that's key. That's the plan for continued improvement. Open the door for others to keep refining this process or replicate it, right? Where else can you use this solution? You just did a great thing. Can somebody else use that? So you want to keep getting the most out of your process improvement project. Why do we have a control phase? The key is to not lose those gains. You did a lot of work. You put a lot in place. And if you're not the process owner, You need to hand off the monitoring and response plan. You want to make sure somebody cares, somebody's watching. Make sure everyone's clear on the ongoing process. You can't drop the ball here. You're building a culture of problem solving. It's key. So this last journey, it's both the end of our journey, and then it's also the launch point of your next journey. So again, you see great examples of templates and the work that happens in the phase. So let's think about some of the challenges and best practices here. So you want to make sure your improvements are solid before you're, off to the races to the next process to fix. Are there visuals? Is it easy to follow? Is it intuitive? Think about that McDonald's and make it so easy for everyone to do what they're supposed to do. And continue monitoring. New processes need care and attention. And the best way is to make monitoring visible and accessible. You could put numbers right on a whiteboard, right next to the people who are doing the work. You could include process participants in the monitoring. You can do hand-drawn charts. Hand-drawn charts and tables are fine. And don't forget, this process can still be improved, and it should be. That same nonprofit childcare client where the team lead was trying to reduce the cost of ordering supplies, once she announced that her savings enabled the organization to afford a whole new mortgage on a whole new daycare center, all the staff got involved. She gets cost-saving ideas from her colleagues weekly. She has 2 suppliers to the external suppliers that not only decrease their prices, they became corporate sponsors of this organization. I get happy emails from her all the time. She's never done with this. I mean, she's doing another project, but she loves that she can continue to update and improve this process. So there you go. It's the restart of a new journey, and the one you just fixed can always be made better. Now, let's think about some classic DMAIC missteps. And the DMAIC structure is great, but when it's used for quick hits, it doesn't work. If you go solo, it's all about engagement. So you can't and you shouldn't take it all on your shoulders, and you can help others build their skills by including them. Jumping to solution, that means skipping the analyze phase, but that's the heart of DMAIC, right? Your gut instincts are right maybe 50% of the time. Why risk it? Because you've done the rest of the work. Lastly, assuming it's done. Remember that team lead at the childcare nonprofit. At the end of an effort, take a moment, appreciate the wins, let others know, celebrate, find ways to expand. Control phase, you're going to monitor, but it doesn't mean the process can't be improved even more. Improvements are not in concrete. So now I'm going to reach out to you guys with a question. So for those of you that have had some process improvement experience, is there a misstep you'd like to add based on your experience with DMAIC? So go ahead and answer that into the question box. And once you enter those, Tracy is going to read those out so we can answer those. So Tracy, of the ones I just mentioned, which one is your biggest pet peeve?
My biggest pet peeve. Well, I will say that jumping to solution probably happens the most often, but my biggest pet peeve is going solo. Feeling like you've got all this knowledge and now you're going to do process improvement to somebody as opposed to collaborating and bringing people with you. So I think people, they get so caught up in the knowledge that they forget it's a people thing too. I mean, you want to bring people along. Processes involve more than one person usually, most of the time. So that means don't do process improvement to them. Bring them with you.
It's a really good point. You make a great point on that. Don't do it to somebody else. This is not something to do to a person. It's to do with a person.
Yes.
All right. What do you say?
Okay, so some of the other common missteps people are saying: lack of sponsorship or leadership commitment, right?
That's a killer. That's a killer. There's nowhere to go. Either, and it could be for lots of different reasons. Maybe they said they were going to support and they didn't, but it basically means that project is dead in the water. You got to find one that somebody will support and follows through on that support. I feel your pain. It's not fun when that happens, but they've got to support it.
Kathy Russ wrote, going too big and losing sight of the original problem.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's back to that clarity. It's where DMAIC can really help as a structure to keep coming back to the charter. Are we still focusing on the same goal? Are we still focusing on the same outcome? Because you can stray. It's amazing that it happens, but you're right. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It starts taking on, more and more parts of the process. So holding that charter close and updating it is a great way to prevent that one.
Mm-hmm. Laura Hall writes, analysis paralysis. Teams went off into non-scope areas because they're so busy analyzing.
Yeah, it depends on the culture, because I know, especially in the hospitality industry, the hotel industry, they really wanted to just jump to it. But when I worked in the networking, the computer networking company, they were more prone to analysis paralysis. So you got to watch what's your culture kind of support and encourage, because that would be something to watch out for when you got there. Because, yeah, people can wallow in that and not get into improve, wanting to get it just right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so we have a few other comments from other people about, like Kenda and Scott, both of them said gathering too much data and then it's difficult to filter. And Scott had mentioned something about the data being compiled over a long period of time and it's messy and daunting. So data issues were mentioned, as well as no one owning the project. So more issues about leadership as well.
Yeah. Those are great points. I'm actually, and that's a great one he just brought up with data being messy, because I'm about to dive in on some tips and tricks. So that really tees up the tips and tricks. Let's go there. So one of the things you've got to do is reach out constantly. I mean, the mention of the sponsorship and support of your projects, one of the people you're reaching out to is that person in the leadership position who said they would sponsor you. They've got to know what you're doing. What did you find? Often they have helpful comments around which direction you should go. You may come to, there's two big problems in this process. Which one should we go after? Because they're going to require different analysis and different solutions. So keep them really close to the project, as well as all the stakeholders. The next one is structure sets you free. So DMAIC provides guidance, but you might have a slightly different path. You don't have to, there's not a by the book way to go through this. And I think about this great example. This is a different organization I was working with recently. Team lead was in charge again of a courier group, and he used a spaghetti map. Usually that you use a spaghetti map. It's kind of like a way to trace all the movements in a workplace. You could actually think about people walking around and seeing the outline of their steps as a form of spaghetti. But he used it to draw the map of where were they driving to get to their destinations, and then compared it with Google. So he went off on his own on how to use a tool, and that was just a great example to me of not feel like you're held in this straitjacket of what DMAIC does. So it gives you structure, but you can move within that structure. The next one is back to the listener who just said data's messy, and that is so true. It is not sitting there for you. You have to go get it. It's not in the form you want. It might not be accurate. You have to dig into the data. You have to filter it. You might want to get the most recent. You have to be very clear of what you need and what you don't need. So that is just a reality of data. So you've really got to work that side of it to make sure you can make it useful for you. The other one is analysis has many forms. You can observe the process. What are people doing in the process? You can study the map. You can talk to people. You can analyze the data. So there's lots of ways to analyze and understand a process. Another one, I think this gets back to that listener's comment about analysis paralysis. And this, I love this phrase, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Implement your idea. Don't wait until you've designed it perfectly to the nth degree. Try it out. Tweak it to make it iterative, right? Do it again, get improvements, get it working, and then get the feedback. Don't wait. And lastly, go immediately to your next project. Do not let your problem-solving muscles atrophy. It should be just the way you do business. You should always be looking for problems to solve. And that brings us to our agenda. We covered what DMAIC was, why organizations use it, how it works, the common missteps, and the tips and tricks to get around it. So what we'd like now is for other questions you guys might have. We want to hear from you. And while you think about entering your questions in the question box, we're going to go over a few things that will be helpful for you guys to know. You can learn more about DMAIC by signing up for any of these trainings and certifications. This might be the start of your journey into Lean Six Sigma, and it's a big world. So lots of tools and templates for you to learn about in the trainings. And this is the bonus for having joined us today. You guys get 20% off before the end of this month. You just use the code 20 DMAIC listed right there. And then there's another webinar coming up, which I mentioned. Tracy, do you want to give these guys an idea of the next webinar?
Yes, so it's Introduction to PDCA, which is Plan, Do, Check, Act / Adjust. And it's really going to be very similar to the format that Elizabeth did today on DMAIC. They're surprisingly similar, and we'll just talk about the differences between the two, as well as the steps PDCA.
And the next podcast, so the podcast that's out right now, Tracy, do you want to talk about your interview with Karen Martin?
Sure. So Karen Martin, if you haven't heard about her yet, I'm shocked. It's because she's written 5 books. She is a very popular in Lean and the Lean community, building Lean. She's very accessible on LinkedIn. She's got free webinars. And we talk about her latest book, Clarity First, in our interview. And it was really awesome talking with her. She's very enjoyable and entertaining as well as smart.
So that's a great one. Listen, check into our podcast if you haven't already. And there also is the latest success story webinar. Tracy, you want to tell us about that?
Sure. So this is success stories are basically successful greenbelt projects for the most part, but not always greenbelt. Sometimes they're black belt projects, or sometimes they're just reducing waste. And so this is really around application, how successful 2 people were or 1 person is with their project. And in this particular case, these 2 girls, Kimberly and Darlene, work at UC San Diego, and they did a process improvement for students who have to submit an event. They have to submit and get the event approved before they can have it. And they went from 27 steps to 7 steps, reducing lead time by 81%. It's a great success story.
And those are all accessible for you guys if you want to see examples of successful projects. And last up, we've got a new series called The Wonder Woman of Quality. It's like the Me Too movement for quality, because usually it's the men of quality. Tracy, you want to tell us a little about Anju?
Yeah, so I've worked with Anju for a very long time, and I'm very happy and proud that she got nominated for Wonder Woman of Quality. She's done an amazing job in King County in the financial group, and she's done some amazing work with leading an entire organization and promoting leader standard work within their organization. And it's great. You should check it out. She's done a lot of good work. She's an inspiration for many.
She is. Okay, let's come back. We've got a little time, and if we don't answer questions on this webinar in the next 3 minutes, we will post them, answers to all your questions online.
Right. So we don't have very many questions for this, but we do have 2 from Anuj. So I'll go ahead, and they're sort of similar. So I'll go ahead and give you that question. And the question is around baseline data. So he first writes, what do you mean by baseline data in the measure phase? And I'm going to just give you both so you can think about it. And so basically it's, what do we mean by that? And if you have a bunch of it, a bunch of data, how do you find the baseline data?
That's a great question. And there's actually 2 webinars. One of them is about collecting data. Another one's about displaying your data. So you should definitely look those up for more depth on this. But your baseline is basically the most recent data around your main metrics. So if you said that you're going to reduce the amount of rework, then you want to measure how much rework is there in the process now. And that might mean you can look and see how often applications were sent back to be fixed, or you might have to collect it live and ask people every time they get an application and there's wrong information or missing information, you want them to write that down. And then you take the total number of applications for a month, you look at all the times that people had wrong or missing information, and you get a percentage. That's your baseline. So it depends on what your metric is. It depends on whether you have existing data or you have to create it yourself. And you have to get enough information to feel like, okay, now I understand how are we doing on cycle time right now? How fast does it take us to check in guests based on the average for the past 3 months? Or how much rework is there based on the data we just collected for the past month? Hopefully that's helpful. But I think there's definitely some resources for you if you want to do exploration of that. And of course, there's a free Yellow Belt training. You can go check out the measure phase there. Tracy?
So Elizabeth, unfortunately, that is really the only other questions that we've gotten, but I will say that someone said, thank you. This was great for my Greenbelt training.
Well, that's awesome. You're welcome. Thanks for joining us, everybody. It's been a pleasure having you.